Richard Ojeda.
Eric Swalwell.
John Hickenlooper.
Jay Inslee.
Seth Moulton.
Kirsten Gillibrand.
Bill de Blasio.
Tim Ryan.
Wayne Meesum.
Beto O'Rourke.
Joe Setsak.
Steve Bullock.
Kamala Harris.
Julian Castro.
Marianne Williamson.
Cory Booker.
And lastly, John Delaney. These are all the candidates that dropped out before we had an opportunity to talk about them in this podcast over a year before Inauguration Day.
Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Eddie.
Welcome to the second episode of Catch 52, a politics podcast brought to you by WDSR, Duquesne Student Radio.
We are now 50 weeks away from the inauguration of the next president, and now that we have gotten all of the names of the people who will not be president out of the way, I think it's time that we talk about Iowa, because we have a lot to talk about today.
Oh boy.
So, in case you haven't heard with Iowa, there were caucuses, and someone won. We don't know who yet, though.
Oh man, it's been all week. So we got ready, we got our popcorn, everything we needed. Iowa caucus. It's the first caucus of them all. It's gonna be a good night, and let's expect the returns to be in by 9:30, maybe 10, if they're like really late, 10:30. And then the waiting began.
Yeah, that's when it got weird, because CNN said results incoming shortly, and then 20 minutes later, results expected any moment. Another 30 minutes later, another 30 minutes later, results to come soon, and until probably I think 1 a.m. they finally made the announcement. Yeah, no results are going to be released tonight. Typically, the winner of the Iowa caucus is decided that night.
Typically, I guess every time, except for like right now. So
yeah, something very similar happened in 2012, where it was just a very close race, and Rick Santorum actually didn't realize he won the Iowa caucuses until over 2 weeks afterwards, which meant that he lost all that momentum going into New Hampshire.
And he seemed a little bit salty about it on CNN, didn't he?
He did, yes, but that's 2012. It's 2020 now, and now instead of Rick Santorum being upset, it's everyone upset.
Everybody is upset. I mean, that night, Twitter was going off all through the night and into the morning.
Yeah.
Hashtag Mayor Cheat.
Pete the Cheat also
trending on Twitter for a solid, probably like 12 hours.
Yeah, what that was, no, it was more than 12 hours. Basically what that was about was Pete gave a speech, as most of the candidates did that night. Bernie, Biden, Warren all did. And Pete said something along the lines of, we started off really small, but we shocked Iowa, and tonight we leave victorious.
Victorious.
Yeah, a lot of people took that to mean winning. And, that's an easy thing to think, but in politics, words matter so much, and there's a reason that he said victorious and not the winner or anything like that.
Exactly. It's not like he went around on a podium waving his hand saying, we are going to be winning, winning, winning. No, because everybody knows that unless you say you're winning, 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 you don't declare victory in politics. I guess unless you're the Democrats. But it was interesting because it was almost like watching a game of chicken, right? Who's going to blink first? Who's going to give their speech. It's not a victory speech. It's not a we can do better next time speech. It was just a speech.
Yeah.
I think Klobuchar gave the first speech, and I think we can count that as actually kind of a boost for her.
She did
taking
a
the
lot
initiative.
better than expected if the results be. So far we have 97% of results in. Pete has about a 0.1% lead over Bernie, but Tom Perez just earlier today said that they are going to do a complete recount of all the votes in Iowa.
Old
so
Tommy P stepping in.
we don't know who's going to win, but Amy Klobuchar did way better than expected, and Joe Biden did way worse than expected.
Oh my God! So let's all right. Let's talk about Biden right now because I think there's if you ask me, there's three stories of big things coming out of Iowa. There's Pete. There's Bernie getting second place / doing about as well as we expected him to do, and then there's Biden. Oh boy, is there Biden!
Yeah.
It was like watching a narrative throughout the evening go on. Jake Tapper or Dana Bash from CNN would go up and they would interview one of the Biden precinct leaders, and they would say, "How do you think you're doing?" And they said, "Oh, we think we're going to make a viability," or they would say, "I think we're everybody's best second choice." And then inevitably, now to be fair, we were watching CNN coverage. Their reporters were placed in the population centers where, of course, Biden was probably predisposed to perform poorly. That said, it clearly was a theme throughout the rest of the night because whenever they would cut back to those Biden supporters, later in the evening, they would be awkwardly caucusing for somebody else. Usually Pete, if not Pete, maybe Klobuchar, but again, those kind of that situation was never on camera. Yeah. They were caucusing for Pete. Very few were caucusing for Biden. I mean, there was one precinct that was being shown. It was a massive gymnasium, and at the end of the day, they had to split between Bernie and Warren.
So actually looking at the results, you see Bernie almost definitely won the popular vote, but just like in the general election, the popular vote is not the determining factor here. Instead, it is who won each precinct and each section. So
let's expand on that for a little bit because I can understand that can be confusing.
Yes. So the way that Iowa caucus works, first off, is that people basically stand in groups based on which candidate they like the most. And if that candidate doesn't get 15% of the people, they are disqualified from that specific polling place. And all those delegates, all the people that were voting for someone, caucusing for someone under 15% have to go somewhere else.
Yeah, they call it viability, which is why if you were watching the live, the live programming, you heard precinct leaders talking about, oh, we're going to make viability. Well, we don't think they'll make viability. That's what it is.
So if you look here, the final vote percentage, Bernie typically won, but because Pete won more precincts, he is currently in the lead in delegates. But if you look at Biden, his first vote percentage was 14.9%. So on average, he was right below viability, and that's a big thing. That's way lower than he was expected to result in.
Exactly, and in the weekend leading up, this is something that I don't believe we talked about this last week, but this is something that deserves a little bit more coverage. The Washington Post did a really, really good piece, and I think NBC News probably did something as well, where they interviewed a bunch of higher-up Biden campaign staffers, and they were very worried, but it was interesting how they were worried, because what they ended up saying is that we're not worried about Biden coming in second or third, because we don't think Biden is going to come in second or third. They were worried about Biden coming in either first place or fourth place, and clearly he came in fourth. Yep. So that is a major concern for the Biden campaign moving into New Hampshire.
Yeah, so if you look at the breakdown of delegates, you have right now Pete at 26.2, Bernie at 26.1, Warren at 18.2, Biden at 15.8, and Klobuchar at 12.2. So you see basically the two or three camps that they're in.
I like how Klobuchar at 12.2 is considered a bump for her.
Yeah, I mean, she was polling at like 2 or 3%. 1 second, we're being told we have a lot of static, so we're going to just stop the broadcast and start right up in just a second.
Thank you for staying with us. This is WDSR, Duquesne Student Radio, Catch 52, a politics podcast. Yes. The annual 7:15 static delay is now out of the way, and we will now get back to talking about some of the woes that Joe Biden and the rest of his campaign have been going through.
So basically what you see is a Biden huge underperformance, a huge overperformance for Klobuchar, and a slight overperformance for Pete that may have vaulted him to the victory, we cannot tell right now because he is only 3 delegates away from Pete or from Bernie. So it's a very close race. 3 delegates out of 550 that Pete has. But that's not the most important story to tell by far. The much more important story to tell is all the results that didn't come in.
Oh boy!
So the situation behind this whole mess was that in 2016, Bernie lost the Iowa caucuses by, I believe it was 5 coin flips, all of which he lost.
5 coin flips. That ended up being 1.3%, I believe.
Something very, very small.
Maybe I'm just remembering Martin O'Malley's popular vote.
He had very, very small amount of vote. And so basically they pushed to say, hey, next time release the popular vote. We want to see the popular vote. We want to see who actually won the Iowa caucuses, which is not the correct thing. So the reason there was a coin flip, I should clarify, is because the rule with caucuses is that if after realignment, which is when all the candidates who have not reached viability move around, if there's a tie, then basically what happens is that instead of having the people like debate and wasting even more time, they just do a coin flip. And so ties are within, I believe, a certain percentage. I don't know the exact rules, but it's something along the lines of
it's very, very close.
If it's practically tied, they're going to do a coin flip to see who wins because it's so close.
Especially in some of the smaller precincts, because I mean these can be like 75 to 100 people in a precinct.
Yeah, so like 15% is really rough, and then like to say someone won by 2 people is a huge thing. So basically, the Bernie people were like, hey, let's make sure next time we have the popular vote, we want to see who, quote unquote, actually won the Democratic caucus. And so Iowa, for the next 4 years, set out to develop a new program and a new way to report their caucuses. And so they set up a 2-stage way to do it. The first stage was an app. And this app was just supposed to be able for you to log on with a specific pin to you and just send over to the Iowa Democratic Party what the vote total was.
It was going to be great.
And then the second backup, in case that for whatever reason failed, was just to call the Iowa Democratic headquarters and tell them what you got. So it seems like a pretty foolproof idea that you have a backup plan, you have a plan B. Both are using pretty established forms of technology. It's not hard to build an app. It's not hard to use a phone.
And you think at Democratic headquarters they've got lots of like spare phones hanging around just for whatever they would use them for. So
on that night, they didn't have many people answering the phones because in all their tests and everything they had tried, it hadn't failed. The app had been good, but for whatever reason, the app did not work that night.
For whatever reason. And now that is still unclear, and that is still being investigated.
Yeah.
The app actually has been used by the company. Now, that specific app, I don't know if that app has been used anywhere else. It was probably just an Iowa custom. Yeah. But the company that made the app, Shadow Inc.
Yes, I believe that's the case.
Which really, I get it that you're like a cool coding company and that, Shadow, but like...
When you're working for politics, don't have that name.
Yeah, come on.
It makes it seem... If they were Rainbow Inc., I don't think some of these conspiracy theories would be happening.
Exactly.
We should get into those now. Basically, some of the people on the more progressive wing, after Pete declared his victory, or I should say left victorious, basically said, so they looked into it, and turns out the Iowa Democratic Party, the National Democratic Party, and the Pete Buttigieg campaign had all given money to Shadow to help them develop the app.
Here's the thing, though. They gave money to Shadow Inc. not because of the app failure, obviously, but because they actually were soliciting services from that company. I mean, there was, and it's not just Pete and it's not just Biden. Kirsten Gillibrand, for example, her campaign gave them $10,000 for phone banking software. Yeah. There's I read somewhere that it was maybe Cory Booker or John Delaney. I don't know. For whatever reason, I mean, different wings of the party have different like companies that they use, and these companies oftentimes will approach people. So like Act Blue, for example. But like I guess the moderate to slightly liberal wing of the party was Shadow Inc. was like effectively like a contractor for them, and this just happened. Mm-hmm. They were paying the company for services, and I'm sure that this being the Democrats, they're probably going to have some kind of like release of receipts and things like that, where Pete's like, I paid them for this app exactly, and all this, and the paper trail will be very clear. Now that said, if there's questions about the paper trail, there will always be questions, but just hold up on the conspiracy theories, because also at the end of the day, in 2016, after 2016, the DNC gave in to some of Bernie's demands. The popular vote was released, and Pete almost won the popular vote. I mean, he's off by 1,000.
The problem with the popular vote, though, is that's what also made this whole process a lot more complex.
Exactly.
Instead of being able to just write it down and drive over to Des Moines to drop it off, they needed it to be as instantaneous as possible. They needed it to be as up to date as possible. And there was a lot of questions like, hey, maybe the Iowa Democratic Party is trying to rig this in Pete's favor. But the problem with that claim is that caucuses are inherently a much more open and much more transparent process than standard voting.
Yeah, how would you, Eddie, how would you rig a caucus?
So the way you'd rig a caucus is essentially saying that there were more or fewer people in any given precinct. But the problem is anyone in that precinct can dispute that information. Like, basically, if we were just voting in our whatever district, people could stuff the ballot. It's not hard to do. You just, put more votes in. With the caucus, you can't put more votes in because everyone sees who wins. So if they say, oh, Pete actually won there, and Bernie was the clear winner or something like that, which people are insinuating might be the case, people would be disputing that like crazy. And there's only been one real case where there's been a major discrepancy like that, and that was something that the Iowa Democratic Party noticed, realized, and so basically they had, I think, 52% of the vote out, like 24 hours afterwards, and then they released another batch, another like 15%. That 15% had a lot of discrepancies, so they retracted that 15% and re-released it with fixes. But now
I think there's another 15% that needs to get done.
Yeah, they're at 97% reported now.
97% reported, but apparently there's another recount underway.
Well, they're recounting the entire thing.
Now that Tom Perez has brought the hammer down.
But basically what happened was that in one county, I think it was Black Hawk County, the vote total showed Pete with a 300 vote lead over Bernie, when in reality Bernie had basically another 1,000 votes. And so that was one big thing that New York Times picked up on right away. But again, that just kind of shows how hard it is to actually rig a caucus, because the chair of the Black Hawk County,
there's so many people that could come out and say, no, this is not how this went down.
Yeah.
Also, at the end of the day, especially in some of these larger ones where a lot of the people who are throwing around more money, your Steyers, your Bloombergs, but he wasn't in on this one. And then, so your Steyers, your Bloombergs, your Wine Cave Pete's, whatever. So those kind of people, they have to. Oh, you're saying that they are going to buy off an entire caucus?
It's a much more difficult process, and so the app crashed for reasons that I'm sure we will find out later, because the Democratic Party is not going to let this just kind of rest.
Yeah.
But the other problem was the phone lines.
So the other problem was 4chan.
Because they were not expecting problems with the app, they did not have many people on the line. The other problem was that instead of creating another private phone number, they just said, oh, call our headquarter office main line. 4chan figured that out, and in a post said, hey, let's clog the lines. So there were...
Genius. Thanks, 4chan.
Multiple hour holds for the entire night for every single person that was trying to call in their results.
And it was really interesting, too, because CNN would, call people, or, for some reason, some of these, on-the-ground reporters, they managed to get in touch or figure out who was trying to call in the votes, and then they would interview those people, and then at one point, there was a person who... they got that person on the phone, and then that person got patched through into the main feed. So somebody was on the phone from an Iowa precinct with Wolf Blitzer, and then while he was interviewing with Wolf Blitzer, because he was like, yeah, I'm on hold. This is absolutely ridiculous. I've been on hold. And he goes, I've been on hold for 50 minutes. It's like, what? And then he goes, oh, no. Now I gotta go. So it was one of these major precincts. Yeah. But he'd been on hold for 50 minutes. It was ridiculous.
So 4chan, for those who might not know, is an internet website where anyone that posts on there is anonymous. You don't need a username, you don't need an email or anything. You just post stuff. And it was, I believe, in the politics, I don't know the actual terminology, but it was in the subgroup of 4chan for politics. They posted this number, and it's just basically a website. A lot of not great stuff happens there, but it's also like one of the biggest places for like memes.
Yeah,
Also.
it's one of the entrances to the dark web, if you will. As far as companies that have Chan in their name go, I mean, 8chan I think was actually taken off the internet by by a company called Epic, which was the company that hosted the server space for 8chan. But 4chan still exists, which is an important distinction to make, because it's still one of these classic, like, I don't know what else to say. It's like a AOL Internet 1.0 style forum.
4chan was also the ones that had the whole Pepe scandal in 2016, where they made, so basically someone on the left was like, hey, there have been some semi-racist memes made with Pepe, and 4chan was like, oh, okay, let's do this, and made just a bunch of very offensive Pepe memes, to the point where the Hillary Clinton campaign came out and called it a hate symbol, and as did, I believe, the ACLU. So they're all
I don't know,
focused on like trolling and trying to do that. But anyways, this whole process raises two big questions, and that's, what does that mean for Iowa, and what does this mean for the Democrats?
So some would say that this is the end. This is the end of the Iowa caucus as we know it. Iowa is not representative of the United States. We are now a melting pot. What I don't know what the word is, what the cooking word is now, but there we are, a fruit salad, multicultural, multi-identity society. In Iowa, 88% white.
Maybe even more.
Maybe even more. And the people who were at the caucus, like, half of them identified as very liberal or somewhat liberal. Meanwhile, the Democrats use Iowa as Iowa first in the nation, appeal to moderates. Watch our last episode.
So, basically, before the Iowa caucus, there was this huge movement to delay Iowa and not make Iowa first. Basically, take away Iowa's first thing.
Yeah, it kind of fell apart, but it had some valid points.
So basically, it was what Alex had said, that Iowa is too old, too white, too moderate to actually represent what the Democratic Party is, and that so that it gives momentum to a candidate that might not necessarily be supported by the whole thing, by the whole party. If you listen to our earlier episode, we made a case as to why having that moderate nominee might be a good thing. That's just a matter of opinion, though.
I will say, though, just based on the entrance polls, the moderate might not be in Iowa anymore. I think Iowa is a very specific kind of voter. I mean, you can look at the Iowa as a breed of moderate, but I wouldn't consider them the kind. Maybe I don't know if they are the kind of moderate anymore that the Democrats are looking for, as far as like, oh, okay, are you representative of the moderate? If so, help us figure out what candidate is going to appeal to you moderates, and then that will help us win. That said, Iowa still has picked lots and lots and lots of Democratic winners.
Yeah, 7 out of the 10, I believe, is the number.
So if Pete I guess if the Iowans have spoken, that if Pete by 1,000 Iowans is a better candidate than, not 1,000 Iowans, by
0.1%
by
of Iowa delegates, or 2,000 Iowa. Well, the thing is, Bernie right now is in the lead by 2,000 votes in the popular vote. But again,
it does come down to the delegates.
Yes, and that's a whole reckoning that the DNC has to go through, is do they become completely popular sovereignty, or do they just stick with a semi, electoral structure as they have basically throughout throughout the entire primary process. So primaries up until probably post World War II were, I think until like Kennedy maybe, were all private. There were no like elections. It was just you went to the
caucus, the meeting room, wherever the party was.
No, like there was not an Iowa caucus. It was just like the meeting of the DNC. You went to the DNC.
It was an internal party decision who would run.
Yeah,
and that's another big change that is kind of a reason why this whole caucus system is weird, because before World War II or whenever it was, it's not like everywhere was a caucus or everywhere was a primary. There were no quote unquote primaries. It was a debate among old white men who got to represent.
Yeah, not until the 1920s did primaries actually start, and they didn't really pick up steam until far after that. Before that, it was just a smoky room where people chose who the leader was, and that system is why there are still superdelegates in the DNC. where basically that gives the party still some say.
But
in the
guys,
process.
superdelegates protect us from radicals.
See, the thing is with superdelegates is that the DNC wishes, or a lot of the, Democratic voters wish the DNC didn't have superdelegates, so Bernie would have had a better shot in 2016. But I'm guessing a lot of Republicans wish the Republicans had those superdelegates so they could have protected against Trump and had a um, slightly less crazy, for lack of a better word, president.
But at the same time, though, from a purely strategic perspective, Trump did win.
Yeah.
And now, years later, Trump is now considered a very strong candidate by, the strategists in the room. We can push back on that later. But gotta stop hitting your pop filter, man.
Yeah, sorry.
But, by the quote-unquote strategists in the room who have maybe realigned themselves, who cares? Trump is considered to be a strong candidate, right? Okay. At the time, he was definitely not. And so the Republican favorite who wasn't Trump, the last guy to drop out was John Kasich, but really it was Ted Cruz.
Yeah.
So could you imagine a strategist's election where the two quote-unquote most electable candidates who were in the race, Hillary Clinton versus Ted Cruz, how well do you think that would have gone?
Yeah.
30% participation rate.
Yeah, you would have had probably one of the lowest turnout rates.
It would have been
ever.
Absurd.
But the thing with Iowa is that does this mean that I don't see a world where Iowa stays exactly how it is. Whether that means the caucus really changed, the popular sovereignty increases, or if they just completely push Iowa back to the middle of the country.
I actually think they might. I think they might keep it. I really do.
I think they might stay first in the nation. I don't think it's going to stay exactly as it was.
It'll get changed, but just at the end of the day, it always comes down to the optics after the fact for political parties, and the optics of saying that Iowa is no longer going to be the first in the nation caucus for the Democrats, who are a party that is very conscious of not just being the party of the coastal elites. I think that's really bad publicity. Yeah. That's really bad PR. It's going to stop them from moving it away.
The other big question, though, is if it moves away from Iowa, who gets it?
Do you just skip it and give it to New Hampshire?
The thing is, you could give it to New Hampshire, but again, New Hampshire is also a very white state. So you might have more problems. Things like, do you give it to a more diverse state? But the thing is, a lot of the more diverse states are either a lot more left or a lot larger. So if like California was the first state, it is a much more demographically accurate state of what America is like, but that's a lot of delegates to give away right away at the beginning.
Wouldn't be the worst idea, but again, I'm sticking to my point about the optics, that the optics are not going to change. Thank you if you're just joining us. It's 7:30, halfway through the hour. This is WDSR, Duquesne Student Radio, Catch 52, a politics podcast. We've been talking about some of the problems with the Iowa caucuses, the struggle with the app, the struggle with the phone, perhaps any problems they may face in the future. Yes. But now it's not just time. It's not like the Iowa caucuses were the only thing that happened. This was an insane week. Quite literally the Super Bowl, if you will, of the primary. So let's talk about the Super Bowl and what happened during those commercials.
There were two political advertisements during the Super Bowl, one for Trump and one for the Democratic, I guess the highest
just one
fundraiser
moment.
We
seem to be having some static problems. Give us one moment while we restart the feed.
And we are back. So we were just talking about the two Super Bowl ads, one from the highest spender in the 2016 presidential election and the other from Donald Trump. The highest spender being Michael Bloomberg, who in Q4 of last year, the last 3 months of last year, outspent Trump and everyone else.
And an interesting thing to note with this is that Trump. So just to talk about spending a little bit before as we go into these Super Bowl ads. I was a big skeptic about how effective ads are.
Yeah.
But what these two ads were, the Trump and the Bloomberg Super Bowl ads, let's not kid ourselves. These were 30-second ads, $5.5 million for 30 seconds to Fox Sports or Fox Maine. I don't know what was whoever was hosting the Super Bowl. So $5.5 million just out of pockets for 30 seconds, but it was probably worth it. Both campaigns featured black women.
Black women, and Trump's campaign.
Or both campaigns, both ads, sorry.
Yes. Trump's campaign focused on actually something you would not expect Trump to focus on at all, which was a bipartisan criminal justice reform bill.
That Cory Booker, sorry, I'm yelling into the mic, that Cory Booker and Jared Kushner got through.
Yeah.
I remember that was supposed to be like a big boost for Cory Booker's campaign, but I mean, of course, he eventually fizzled out. But that was the First Step Act, right?
I believe so. Yeah, it was one of both President Trump and Nancy Pelosi's big policy goals going in.
Yes, and Cory Booker and the Kush got together. They got it done, and I think it was something that, I mean, nobody really understands it, but it seems to have a lot of support with. It had support with like police unions. It had support with the ACLU. So I think it's one of these like omnibus bills that has a lot of concessions on both sides, so everybody gets behind it. It
was apparently a pretty good piece of legislation, but President Trump got some very good press out of that. But the bigger thing was Michael Bloomberg, and that's because Michael Bloomberg is one of the few Democratic candidates that can really get under Trump's skin.
Yeah, which is kind of, it's a bit of an oddity because he calls him Mini Mike, which I think is, Bloomberg is taller than Trump, right?
I'm not sure. We'll find that out.
I'm always conflating Bloomberg with
De Blasio.
With De Blasio. I'm always conflating Bloomberg with De Blasio. And the reason that is, I mean, they're both New York mayors. They're both, I assume, tall, and they're both kind of, well, de Blasio wasn't throwing money around. Bloomberg, on the other hand, is, I mean, he's on track to spend $1 billion in the primary.
Bloomberg is not the tallest guy. He's a 5'7".
Oh, yay.
Yeah, Trump is 6'3". So standing next to each other, you do see a significant difference between the two.
That's fair. Okay, so maybe he is Mini Mike.
But the thing is, Bloomberg has this ability to get under Trump's skin because Trump values money a lot and values spending a lot, as you can tell from everything about him. But so does Michael Bloomberg.
And that's the thing. Trump fears Bloomberg. There's been a number of reports that have come out talking from. I really would like to meet a Trump staffer because the amount of like insanely personal stories that they have about this guy, it's almost as if like he must be like the most open book. The point being, Trump apparently has like metaphorical nightmares about Bloomberg because of his money. Trump apparently thinks that money really is the only thing that matters in politics, whether you have it before, and that sort of just goes into like his ego, his complex that is very focused on your personal wealth equating to your personal value in society. So not only is Bloomberg significantly more wealthy than him, but Bloomberg has been throwing a lot more money around than he has.
And not only is it the spending this election, but if you also look at what Michael Bloomberg's done, he not only founded his own news agency, he was also awarded the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire. So he's gotten a lot of awards for, not doing that much outside of, being rich and founding a Wall Street media corporation.
That said, it's still effective.
Yes.
And to just keep going on that Vanity Fair piece, it talked about then like how effective is getting under Trump's skin, and is Bloomberg the guy to do it? Is it a good strategy? Number one, I think Bloomberg probably is the guy to do it. But again, is it really happening because of who Bloomberg is, or is it happening because of Bloomberg's money? I think it's happening because of the money, especially if you, I mean, who else had a Super Bowl ad?
Yeah. It's just
nobody else.
Bloomberg. So that's the Super Bowl, and there's still two more major events to talk about. So on Sunday we had the Super Bowl. On Monday we had Iowa. On Tuesday we had the State of the Union address.
Steve Harvey's State of the Union.
So the way the State of the Union essentially works is that just a bunch of pomp and circumstance for the president to give an hour-and-a-half speech where his party stands up a bunch and the other party pouts. That's basically what every single State of the Union has been since probably 2004.
Yeah, but a lot of State of the Unions are actually relatively informative. They're not like campaign rallies.
Yes and no. There's always an underlying theme of here's why I'm so great and here's why I'm helping lead this country. There has to be a certain amount of narcissism in any single president, no matter who they are, in order to win.
But again, I mean, this is just what have you done for me lately? But I mean, the two the two people who ever gave State of the Union addresses that I honestly remember are Barack Obama and Donald Trump. Every time Barack Obama gave a State of the Union address, it was a we thing. It was almost like a coach talking to a team. Like, we did this. I'd like to thank this person and this person to help us do this. Whereas with Trump, and this is only his second State of the Union speech that I've listened to, it was an I thing. I did this. He called out a few senators and governors that might have been in tough races. I did this. I did that with the help of this person. I did this.
But the speech itself was not the main aspect. Of course, there was the moment, just like there was, I believe, last year, where Trump says a line and they're not expecting the Democrats to stand up, and they all stand up, and it's like a nice little moment where, like, oh, maybe America's not going down the toilet. But then you see at the very beginning, Trump comes in. There's questions as to whether or not Nancy Pelosi announced him correctly. But then Trump gives Mike Pence the speech, kind of hands it over to Pelosi and turns away as Pelosi sticks out her hand asking for a handshake.
As she was later quoted on Twitter saying, the Democratic Party will always be the party the party that reaches out a helping hand, regardless of whether it is taken. Something along those lines.
Yeah. And then at the end of the speech, Pelosi responded in kind by ripping up in multiple pieces Trump's speech that he had handed her at the beginning as he declined her handshake.
And if you thought that she had been trying to hide it, come on, no.
She was quoted on saying that was the most courteous thing she could have done.
Yep.
Take that as you will. Pelosi is a very skilled politician, and I don't put it past her to be able to not tear up a speech in front of him. So that was definitely a political statement. Don't get that wrong. Yeah, the question is, how effective has it been? Because Pelosi has not been the most effective in her political statements recently.
No, she's not. I mean, the State of the Union has started to become a lot more about, signaling and the hoopla.
Yeah.
And this was just the next iteration of that. I mean, you have, do the women in the Democratic Party have a caucus? Is it like the I don't know. If
probably, yeah.
I know they do off the top of their head, but I mean, ever since Trump's first State of the Union speech, the all-white clothes.
Yeah, that would be the Congressional Caucus for Women's Issues.
Congressional Caucus for Women's Issues. Thank you. So they've worn all-white attire to every State of the Union as protests, and I mean, it's incredibly visible. It's a large part of the Democratic caucus, and so you've got that kind of going on. I mean, throughout the State of the Union, you had apparently multiple Congress people walking out. Seth Moulton walked out.
As did Tim Ryan. And you also saw some people just not show up, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did not.
Yeah, AOC was notably absent. The camera panned in on Representatives Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar.
Yes.
AOC was notably absent. I think other representatives, there was a California representative I know who boycotted in the past. But again, it was just all a lot more public this year, and that's just the Democrat side of it, though. On Trump's side of it, I mean, if you watched and if you've seen anything recently, I mean, you know what happened. He just, I mean, it was kissing babies while giving a speech in the Chamber of Congress.
House of Representatives, yes.
Chamber of the House of Representatives. It was ridiculous. What has Rush Limbaugh done to deserve the Presidential Medal of Freedom?
I don't know. The Medal of Freedom is also largely a political statement, or else they would have given him like the Medal of Honor. Joe Biden received the Medal of Freedom for being the vice president.
Sure.
Like you don't necessarily need the medal. You don't need a huge accomplishment to be awarded the Medal of Freedom. It's more a personal thank you from the president. I mean, like you did get like
radio show host.
You know, Oprah Winfrey got one, and she's done a lot of philanthropy things, and like Ellen DeGeneres got one, and she's done one. I think Lin-Manuel Miranda might have gotten one also for, I think, writing Hamilton. I don't know, but
like there's certain philanthropic things that all these public figures you can kind of point to. You can say, yeah, well, they did that. And sure, they're left wing, but like, I don't like. Is Rush Limbaugh like a big philanthropy guy? Let's assume he does something. Yeah. But like, I mean, he's on that radio show every day. Like, I don't know off the top of my head. There's like, oh, you know, Rush Limbaugh is donating to this. Like, is he donating to the NRA? I mean, is that the kind of philanthropy he's up to?
I mean, if you look at like some of the recipients, it's you don't necessarily have to make a significant contribution to the world, like the world as a whole. Architects get it, dancers get it. It's not just
All right.
one. It's not a political. It's not for your service to America. It's just for being a. Is there an actual reason? President's role for meritorious contribution to the security or national interest of the United States or world peace or cultural or other significant public or private endeavors. So
all right, Rush Limbaugh definitely is part of the culture, though. So that's, I guess, a little bit more fair. Don't mind my partisan berating of
Tom
Rush
Hanks,
Limbaugh.
De Niro, Steven Spielberg, Rob Redford, Meryl Streep. Like they're not huge in changing America or protecting her national interests. It's all about
sure.
Yeah.
But to move away from Rush Limbaugh, I mean, you had everything. I mean, it was kind of like the Super Bowl if you think about it. You had the 100-year. I think it was actually the same 100-year-old Tuskegee Airman. Awesome, by the way, to have that guy there. I mean, and then his grandson or great grandson. I'm going to assume grandson. His grandson who wants to be in the Space Force or said he wanted to be in the Space Force. I don't know. Respect either way because that's pretty awesome.
Well, actually, to circle back to Rush Limbaugh real quick, I have this quote right here. Rush Limbaugh has used his platform for philanthropic causes, among them the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society of America.
All right.
And his annual Curathon broadcast on his 3-hour radio show has raised over $47 million to advance the organization's family support research program.
All right, never mind. I take that back. That's a lot of money.
He's done a lot for philanthropy, regardless of whether or not you agree with him politically. So that was the big State of the Union. Trump pulled out all the stops and had a bunch of pomp and circumstance. All that fun stuff.
There was a guy that came back home from Afghanistan.
Yeah, there was a military reunion, but then
a bunch of single moms.
Lastly, you had, I think, 16 hours afterwards, probably.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, his to quote him, total exoneration from impeachment. So,
and I'll tell you what. Total exoneration, that is an understatement. If you talk to the Trump campaign, I signed up for their email list, and they have been going off ever since the vote to acquit, which was every single Republican, except for Mitt Romney, by the way.
Yes, when Mitt Romney is actually a very significant vote in this. He is the first ever person to vote to convict a president of his own party. Not during the Johnson impeachment, not during the Clinton impeachment, did any, I guess both of them would be Democrats in that situation. No, it would have been Republican for, Johnson ran as he was National Unity Party at the time, but
point being,
at no point did any person vote against their own party interests to convict a sitting president in their own party, except for Mitt Romney.
Except for frickin' Mitt Romney. Now, I will say, Mitt Romney is, despite what he said in the 2012 election, Mitt Romney is an exceedingly moderate Republican. I mean,
yes.
Romney Care in Massachusetts was the prototype for
Obamacare.
The Affordable Care Act.
Basically, Freedom House worked with Mitt Romney to develop this program. They implemented it. It was wildly successful. Obama saw how successful it was. This Freedom House and moderate Republican policy implemented it. Freedom House and Mitt Romney suddenly did a complete 180, and Mitt Romney ran in 2012 on the pretense of completely repealing Obamacare.
Imagine running against your own policy.
And your pride and joy of a policy, too.
Yeah.
That was his biggest thing.
It really was.
In Massachusetts.
Or and getting Deval Patrick elected? No, I'm kidding. No, the requirement for being a governor in Massachusetts are two things, at least in the past few years. Number one, moderate Republican. Number two, at some point you have to have worked for Bain Capital.
Yeah. But
calling out Deval Patrick.
The big thing is there are three big factors in this impeachment thing that just happened, and that's what does this mean for Donald Trump? What does this mean for the Republicans that voted to impeach him? And what did this mean for the Democrats that voted to impeach him? And what does this mean for the Republicans that voted to acquit him?
So here's, I mean, it's got a lot of different meanings. I think Nancy Pelosi. I mean, I think she saw this coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
As I've heard some commentators saying that, he's still definitely very, Trump is still pretty angry about this, and we will see as this plays out. I mean, it is an election year right now. He does not forget old grudges, as has been well documented. He does not forget old grudges. I would not be surprised if it comes up in the debate. I will not be surprised if it comes up on the campaign trail. And I mean, just to give you an idea of the kind of stuff that the email list has been sending out. There's been 6 emails in the past 24 hours. The impeachment hoax confirmed, to quote the email, The impeachment hoax confirmed what we've known all along. President Trump did nothing wrong. The Democrats are claiming his wrongful impeachment will be his legacy forever, which, I mean, legally speaking, it will be. They couldn't be more wrong. President Trump has been acquitted forever, unless they impeach him again.
So he also called his opponents evil and corrupt, and he was talking about in his speech how much it hurt him to be impeached and how hard it was for him. Talking about they're vicious and mean. Adam Schiff is a vicious, horrible person. Nancy Pelosi is a horrible person. That is a direct quote.
Alexander. Sorry, Chuck and Nancy. Washington Democrats and the lamestream media have spent the last 3 years trying to overturn the 2016 election, and they have failed. At no point was anybody trying to overturn a very legitimate election.
Yeah.
They've been after me since the day I was elected, and they have absolutely nothing to show for it except millions in wasted taxpayer dollars.
So the big question is, what does this mean for Trump? My personal theory, probably not much at all. If you look at what people's favorability is for Trump, it's the
highest it's ever been.
It's the highest it's ever been, but that's at what? 51%?
It's never been above 50.
So, what does that actually mean for Trump? I don't think it means too much. His approval goes up and down constantly.
Very true.
And, right now the most recent polls are putting him, Rasmussen's putting him at 50 as they normally do. But every other poll puts him at high mid 40s. The average right now in Real Clear Politics is a 45% approval rating. So it's still a negative approval rating. He has had the lowest approval ratings of any sitting president ever running for re-election. He's the only impeached president running for re-election.
Yes.
But I don't think that matters, because what it's going to come down to is, what do the people in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan care about? It's not impeachment.
Yeah.
They don't care about impeachment.
That's the one thing that has been consistently, determined as reporters are scouring these places. I mean, there are people who care, but they're the partisans, so nobody really cares about them. The people whose votes the Democrats and Republicans are trying to secure do not care about impeachment.
Yeah, your average Jim in Bethel Park doesn't care about what the impeachment process is happening. He cares about his roads. He cares about his education. He cares about his health care. And impeachment on either side, I don't think, is a winning issue. However, I don't think it's a winning issue in presidential campaigns. I do think it can be a winning issue in Congress.
So you're saying that impeachment is going to impact down the ballot?
So I think it can negatively impact both the House Dems that impeached him and the Republicans that acquitted him. So the House Dems, to begin, I worked in a congressman's office, in Connor Lamb's office last semester, and I got a lot of calls regarding impeachment, as you can probably assume, working the phones in a moderate Democrats district in a +3 Republican district. And in that time, a lot of those calls that I got were, you're making a big mistake, we're not going to vote for you, all that stuff like that. And, those are probably the people that didn't vote for him in the first place. But there is the question of, will your, average Jim vote for someone that voted to impeach Trump if they think impeachment's a waste of time?
Exactly. If they oh, I really like this candidate, but they voted to impeach Trump, but I agree with them on all their policies. It's an interesting conundrum to be in, but I think it's one that, at the end of the day, if you're a candidate who has an appealing narrative, whose policies align with the quote unquote pivotal voter, or with whoever you need to align with in that district, I think it's not a deal breaker for a lot of people. So there's an upside in that way.
But then the other question is, what happens to all those moderate Republicans running for re-election in 2020? What happens to Susan Collins, especially? Susan Collins
has basically, I don't know how. I mean, it's difficult to.
When Trump took office to now, her disapproval has gone down almost 50 points.
Her disapproval has gone down.
Her approval has gone down.
Okay, yeah. Her approval has gone down 50 points.
50 points. Not
How
just
is that possible? What's her approval rating right now?
It is right now. It's in the 30s. It was in the 80s.
Shall we issue our second prediction as a podcast regarding Susan Collins?
That she's out,
or going to retire? ?
So the question is, there are other people. So in Colorado, there's Cory Gardner. There are a few other semi-moderate Republicans running for re-election, and that vote to acquit could possibly impact the re-election efforts, especially with the number of uh, moderate suburban women we saw vote Democratic last time. If the what you saw is a lot of people saying, "I don't like Trump. I don't want Trump to be. I don't like Trump's presidency." And so these people that voted to keep the Trump presidency alive, how will that affect their standing?
But also at the end of the day, I mean, I know we just kind of tried to discredit the Iowa caucus for a little bit, but let's take a look at some of the polls that came out of Iowa, and I'm not talking about the actual election. I'm talking about the entrance polls because those polls to me were super revealing. Now I know it's a weird sample size because you're sampling people who are going to a Democratic caucus in Iowa, but stick with it for a second because Iowa has a history of picking winners. 44% of people who went to the caucus, their primary issue was health care. After that, it was 21%, which was their primary issue was climate change. And then after that, they had income inequality and foreign policy, which both combined, I think those were both around 10%, something like that. Yep. And then you had a bunch of miscellaneous issues. Impeachment was not an issue there.
So if you look at the people that are up for re-election, the only real Democrat you see who's really in danger of losing a seat is Doug Jones. In my opinion, that's because Doug Jones was not the right candidate to run. You should never be running a pro-choice candidate in Alabama. But if you look at the Republicans that are up, you have Martha McSally in Arizona, who I believe was appointed to fill in John McCain's death, or was just reelected in a 2 Senate thing.
She won a very, she won a very, very close very close. It was a special election. So she's due for a reckoning just as much as Doug Jones is.
So you have her coming in. Arizona is trending blue. You have Cory Gardner, who has barely snuck by. He's been in since 2015, so this will be his first re-election term. That's a big question mark. You have both Georgia representatives going up for election because you had another special election candidate, including David Perdue, who is a Trump appointee and not very popular.
Has Stacey Abrams declared whether she's going to run or not?
I don't know, but the thing is, Georgia is also slowly moving blue, and you could see a tough race there.
I'm not going to hold my breath on Georgia turning blue, though, because in my estimation, I think Florida is turning hard red.
Florida is definitely turning red, as is New Jersey.
Yes. So bye-bye Bob Menendez eventually.
But Bob Menendez staved off a victory in 2018 with riding the blue wave. So in Iowa, actually, you have Joni Ernst, who's also not super popular.
That said, she's getting a lot of party promotion. I mean, Trump has been calling out Joni Ernst on like a bi-weekly basis, it seems. I mean, he called her out in front of Chinese President Xi Jinping when they were talking about the Phase 1 trade deal. I think he called her out in the State of the Union.
I don't believe.
No, maybe not. But clearly there are certain senators and governors that the party would like to do their best to help stay alive. Joni Ernst is on that list.
Yeah. So to round off the list, you also have Tom Tillis from North Carolina. He also is a moderate who's not super popular, could be voted out. A lot of these 2015 or the 2014 election Republicans, you have the Democrats just the Democrats' dream, Mitch McConnell up for re-election.
Oh.
Is he going to get voted out? Almost definitely no. You have Susan Collins. And lastly,
Amy McGrath is not a bad candidate.
Something that we both might like is that Pat Roberts is retiring out of Kansas.
Oh boy.
Meaning, for the second time in 2 years, there will be a vacancy in the Kansas for a U.S. Kansas
Paul Davis
seat.
said he was retiring.
Paul Davis said he was retiring, but so did Brett Favre. That's all I'm going to say. And with that, it is 7:58, so we will have to wrap up this episode for today. The New Hampshire primaries are right around the bend, so when we get back to you, we will be talking about that. And we will see you guys or hear you guys later. Make sure to check us out on, right now we're on Spotify, we're on Google Play, we're on YouTube. We are working to get on iTunes as fast as possible. but we will try and do that soon. So that, again, our time is just about up for this Thursday evening.
Our intro and outro music is by Paul Abrams and Rock Solid Panda, produced by Elise Duda. Our signal monitors are James Walsh and Nick Delisio.
As I said before, you can find us on our YouTube, on Spotify, or on Google Play Music. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter to stay updated on airtimes, episode topics, and any upcoming guests.
We welcome your comments, your feedback, and your suggestions. It's 7:59. Stay with us on WDSR. Have a good Friday and a great weekend.